We grow up learning particular, specific ways of thinking. We learn these from the environment we live in, from our social situation. As General George Marshall phrased it long ago, he learned everything he knew at his mother's knee and other low joints. After we learn specific ways of thinking, they become habitual. And it takes effort to think outside of these habits. But as free thinkers and free formers, as Rev. Dr. J. Hooper insists we must become, we are committed to examining ways that we think. How do we think? And one way most of us have been enculturated is by thinking of knowledge as a tree. It is our metaphor for various kinds of knowledge. Let's get my slides up here, and you can see this good slithery snake. After all, one of our foundational stories in our culture is of Adam and Eve and their encounter with the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We have family trees. We have phone trees. We have trees showing authority that we call flow charts. After you start thinking about it, we have a lot of trees in our minds. And we don't see the trees because our culture says it's a forest of thought. But unlike the actual trees out there that help us breathe fresh air, these mental trees can be oppressive. Two French philosophers, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, in a pair of books together titled Capitalism and Schizophrenia, yes, how do they feel about capitalism, set out to change our way of thinking away from this hierarchical process. And I'm going to play a 3-minute theory for you, and you too can subscribe to this on YouTube.
The rhizome is a concept developed by Deleuze and Guattari that can be defined as an A-centered multiplicity. Wait, what? What does that mean? Okay, multiplicities can be understood as neither subject nor object, only magnitudes and dimensions that can't increase in number without changing in nature. Take temperature, for example. 80 degrees Fahrenheit has a certain feeling to it. Any adding or subtracting of degrees results in a different feeling. Compare that to, say, adding or subtracting from a bag of marbles. Whether you add to it or take from it, it's still a bag of marbles. This is a quantitative difference versus a multiplicity, which is more of a qualitative difference. So anyway, that's a multiplicity, and while a rhizome is just a bunch of multiplicities put together in a way that has no structure at all. So why is the concept of the rhizome useful? Well, to think with it is to unveil the many ways that you can approach a thought or activity. Helps question hierarchies and binaries, and provides us with a way to see how everything can be multiple and interrelated. To illustrate this concept, let's compare a tree with ginger. First, imagine a tree with roots extending into the ground, a trunk coming up out of the ground, and branches that go into the sky. Thinking has been historically imagined like this, based on the idea of hierarchies and categorizations. Much of Western philosophy stems from this thinking and can be seen in the structure of our schools, corporations, and even things like child development theories. All of these present a beginning, which is at the bottom, and one desired end to meet at the top. Where the tree is rooted and logical, ginger growth really doesn't make any sense at all. It has no top or bottom and goes off in every which way. Deleuze and Guattari describe 6 characteristics of the rhizome. Notice how they fit the image of ginger. Connectivity and heterogeneity means that any point can be connected to any other, no matter how similar or different. Multiplicity, remember temperature. A signifying rupture, which means the rhizome can be broken off at any point, but it'll always start up again. And cartography and decalcomania, which makes us think of the rhizome as a map, something that's always open and can be entered at any point. Think about it. Is there really a starting point to reading a map? What these 6 characteristics help us see is that the rhizome is not just a thing, but probably more of a process, an immanent process that allows us to question hierarchical organization. The rhizome's emphasis is not on what is or what was, but more on what can become of it. Some other illustrations of rhizomes might be the internet, especially a website like Wikipedia, or crabgrass. These things don't have a central root, origin, or logical pattern to their growth. These examples and their rootlessness help us envision how we might oppose what has been called rational approaches to knowledge. To think with the rhizome is to give up, at least for a little, beginnings and endings, tops and bottoms, and that comfortable shade of the tree. Because remember, rhizomes are always in the middle and suggest ways of rehabilitating thought as a creative and dynamic enterprise, where things aren't just this or that, but always and.
And no, we don't have their reading list, but you can definitely subscribe to 3-Minute Theory and can, from there, find out lots and lots of stuff. Well, this all sounds very abstract and philosophical, perhaps, but non-hierarchical ways of thinking and searching have become part of our lives. Now, they published this book in 1980 before the advent of the World Wide Web. And that's one of the reasons people are watching their ideas these days, because they were thinking way down the road. You get on the web, you start searching for this sort of thing, and wherever you end up, that's fine, and you're going to learn things along the way. And maybe it will change your way of thinking. Deleuze and Guattari contrast between aberrant thinking. They are French philosophers after all, so, bear with them. But it's tree-like, hierarchical, and vertical thinking. And then rhizomatic thinking that is non-hierarchical and horizontal. So basically, vertical, horizontal, but also thinking of that tree that is rooted but goes up to the sky, so there's always an up, instead of that rhizome where it's always over and over and across and across and across. Now, I'm not talking about real trees here. Real trees are wonderful. I'm talking about the tree that's been planted in your head, whether you have noticed it or not. It is up there. And, God, CEOs, white men, somebody is up there, maybe, telling you that they are up there. Well, Deleuze and Guattari say, don't listen. Whether up there is heaven or Washington, D.C., or a corner office somewhere, don't listen. Think for yourself. Alcoholics Anonymous is a very famous rhizomatic model. That's why it's in almost all the church basements in the United States. It is non-hierarchical. You can start your own chapter. Black Lives Matter follows the rhizomatic organizational model. Community organizers follow the rhizomatic model. As a matter of fact, nowadays we talk about leaderless revolutions and leaderless protests. That is rhizomatic, and guess what? You can't arrest just one person. It's a way of thinking that is antithetical to hierarchy, centralization, and paternalism. Now, one book on this topic came out a few years ago, is The Starfish and the Spider, The Unstoppable Power of Leaderless Organizations. Yes, the rhizomatic one is the starfish. Also, there's a famous one called The Cathedral and the Bazaar, Musings on Linux and Open Source by an Accidental Revolutionary. This was a book in the old days, and now it's online and keeps expanding. Another, by the same author, principal author, is The Starfish and the Spider, is The Chaos Imperative, How Chance and Disruption Increase Innovation, Effectiveness, and Success. A current New York Times bestseller is Call Sign Chaos by Mad Dog Jim Mattis, a Marine four-star general, Secretary of Defense for about 10 minutes, right? And Mattis talks in that book about the Marines and how their decisions are best when they are done rhizomatically. You don't think of the military as rhizomatic, but on the ground, it darn well better be. Now, why am I talking about all of this? Well, it's because of this. And I do want to thank FUS member Amanda Harrington for making this, by the way, because it wasn't easy. And take a good look at this flow chart for First Unitarian Society. From this chart, if you look closely, you will see at the top is the congregation, the members. You are the boss here. But even when we point out how it really is that members are in charge, it's easy for some to feel excluded or feel like a little tiny part or like essentially no part at all, especially people who are new to our community. How do you get in to this structure? And in any human organization, it's easy to develop situations like George Orwell warned about. All are equal, but some are more equal than others. That's what we want to avoid, is Orwellian thought. When you feel like that, think about the rhizome. The strength of the congregation is in each of you. Now, where I come from, one of the most pernicious plants in the Mid-South is kudzu. It is an invasive rhizome. And what makes kudzu mighty is exactly because it is a rhizome. No hierarchy, no beginning, no end. And yes, it can crawl right up a light pole and go right across the road on the wires. You can cut down a tree, but kudzu, Now, when it comes to you being a member of FUS, an ambassador for FUS, and of humanism, always think kudzu.